Welcome to 3 Minutes of History. I'm your future history teacher, Chris Oxenford, and let's get started.
On the night of April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was attending Ford's Theater. At about 10:25 p.m., a man entered the president's box. He was the famous actor John Wilkes Booth. Booth, unnoticed by the president's party, paused for a few seconds just behind the door and waited for a particularly funny line in the play. Covered by the sound of the laughter, Booth stepped into the president's box, drew a small pistol from his pocket, and fired into the back of the president's head. Lincoln slumped forward in his chair and then fell over. Major Henry Rathburn, one of Lincoln's companions, attempted to grab the actor, but Booth used a large knife to stab him in the upper arm and then jump onto the stage. Once he was on the stage, Booth yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis," the state motto of Virginia, which means thus always to tyrants. Booth then fled the theater. After he was shot, Lincoln was taken across the street to the home of a tailor, William Peterson. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, Lincoln would die the next morning at 7:22 a.m. Present at the moment of his passing, Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton declared, "Now he belongs to the ages." As the president lay dying, Booth ran into a back alley where he had a horse waiting for him. He crossed the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. After crossing the Navy Yard Bridge, Booth made his way to Surratt's Tavern, which was owned by Mary Surratt, the mother of one of Booth's co-conspirators. He was joined at Surratt's Tavern by David Harold, another one of his co-conspirators. The two men retrieved guns and proceeded to make their way to the home of Samuel Mudd, a doctor that lived in Maryland. When he had jumped from the president's box, Booth had injured his left fibula and required medical attention. The extent of Mudd's involvement with the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln is still unclear. However, at 4 a.m. on April 15th, Mudd splinted Booth's left leg and also arranged to have a pair of crutches made for him. David Harold and John Wilkes Booth remained at Samuel Mudd's home for 12 to 15 hours before moving on to their next destination. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton took charge of the response to the Lincoln assassination. Stanton placed the city of Washington on high alert. He ordered all soldiers to lock down the city, ordered all trains headed south to be stopped, and ordered that all fishing boats remain on the Potomac River. Stanton personally took charge of the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth. He offered a reward of $50,000 for the capture of Booth and $25,000 for the capture of each of his co-conspirators. Under Stanton's direction, the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth would be one of the largest in American history, involving thousands of soldiers, detectives, and police officers. After they left Dr. Mudd's house, Booth and David Harold made their way to the home of Samuel Cox, a Confederate sympathizer. Cox arranged to hide the two men in a swamp near his home for 5 days. On the afternoon of April 24th, the two men made their way across the Potomac River to the home of Richard Garnett in King George County, Virginia. 2 days later, before dawn on April 26, 1865, Garnett's barn was surrounded by soldiers from the 16th New York Cavalry. Their lieutenant ordered Booth and Harold to surrender. Harold went quietly, but Booth refused. In response, the soldiers set the barn on fire. Booth attempted to make his way out the back door of the barn, but he was intercepted by Sergeant Boston Corbett of the New York Cavalry. Corbett raised his gun and fired into the back of Booth's head. 2 hours later, Booth was dead. For their role in the capture of the presidential assassin, the members of the 16th Regiment received $1,658 each. After his death, Lincoln's body was returned to the White House, where it would lie in state in the East Room for 2 days. Hundreds of thousands of people attended the viewing of his body on April 19th. 2 days later, the president's body, escorted by 6 of his family members, was taken onto a special train bound for Springfield, Illinois. During its 1,700-mile-long journey from Washington to Springfield, the train was viewed by millions of mourners. Illinois politicians tried to convince Mary Lincoln to have her husband buried in downtown Springfield, but she would have none of it. Instead, Lincoln was buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was eventually entombed next to him. John Wilkes Booth's body was taken to the old Washington Penitentiary, where it was buried for several years, before in 1869 being returned to his family and buried in Baltimore.
This has been 3 Minutes of History. I'm Chris Oxenford. Thank you for joining me.